Lightning splits the sky as an aging Iowa farmer spots a mysterious woman standing in the storm alone, scared, gripping a guitar case like her life depends on it. What he doesn't know is that she's running from a ruthless man determined to silence her forever. Secrets, betrayal, and danger follow close behind, plunging the quiet farmland into a showdown he never saw coming. Soon, he'll have to risk everything he's built to protect the woman whose haunting voice once captivated millions, but who now desperately needs his help to survive. Can an ordinary man take on powerful enemies to save someone he barely knows? Will courage and faith prevail over threats and manipulation? If you love dramatic stories of justice, unexpected heroes, and redemption against the odds, stay tuned and hit that subscribe button now because the fight for truth is just beginning, and you won't want to miss how this incredible story ends. Jacob Emery first noticed the storm clouds piling up in the western sky as he drove his battered old pickup down the winding country road. He was 61 years old, lean from decades of farming, and his leathery hands gripped the steering wheel with the steady resolve of a man who had weathered many tempests, both real and metaphorical. The plan was simple: deliver a few extra crates of eggs and homemade preserves to the local church before the worst of the weather set in, then hurry back to his aging but beloved Iowa farm. His fields had been parched for weeks, so the rain was actually welcome, but he would have preferred a gentler shower to the swirling mass of black clouds overhead. Lightning flickered on the horizon, followed by the low rumble of thunder. Still, Jacob was determined. He'd given Reverend Boyles his word that he'd help stock the church's pantry, and he wasn't one to break a promise. He had lost his wife, Mary, nearly 10 years earlier. Cancer took her swiftly, leaving him with an empty house and a heart heavier than any boulder on his property. The two had never been blessed with children, so all Jacob had was the land acres upon acres that had been in his family since the late 1800s. Each day brought fresh challenges, sagging fences, a dwindling savings account, and the gnawing fear of losing the place his grandfather had built with his own hands. Yet Jacob pressed on, waking before dawn to tend livestock, planting row after row of corn and soybeans, even if the yields never seemed quite enough. As the first fat raindrops began to spatter his windshield, Jacob caught sight of a figure up ahead. The person stood at the roadside, hunched against the gale, a small suitcase at their feet and a guitar case clutched tight against the chest. The hood of a jacket soaked through by the rain concealed most of the traveler's face. Jacob felt a jolt of concern. Hitchhikers were uncommon around these parts, especially in foul weather. Most folks in the county knew one another and would phone a friend if they needed a ride. This stranger looked very much alone and, from the posture, more than a bit desperate. He slowed the truck, rolling down the passenger window with a creak. The wind whipped rain into the cab. "You need help," he called out. The traveler hesitated a moment, then spoke in a voice barely audible over the downpour. "Yes, please. I'm trying to get further down the road." That was all Jacob needed to hear. He flipped the switch that unlocked the door. "Hop in," he said. "I'm headed to St. Christopher's Church first, then back to my place. You're welcome to ride along." The passenger opened the door, sliding onto the seat in a flurry of drenched jacket and damp hair. Jacob could see, through a brief flash of lightning, that the figure was a woman, her features soft. Mid-30s, perhaps. Eyes wide with a mixture of relief and caution. She set the guitar case carefully between her knees and murmured a grateful thank you. As the truck lurched back onto the pavement, Jacob snuck a sideways glance at her. She was shivering slightly, hugging that guitar case like it was her lifeline. The etched letters A.R. on the side caught his eye, but he said nothing about it. Instead, he cleared his throat and offered the spare towel he kept in the cab. "Name's Jacob Emery," he said simply, trying not to sound too intrusive. "I've got a farm about 10 miles up the road." She took the towel with a thin smile, drying her face and muttering, Annabelle Rhodes." He thought the name sounded vaguely familiar, like he'd heard it somewhere before, but the crack of thunder drowned out the thought, and he refocused on the slippery road ahead, unaware that the stranger beside him carried far more secrets than her single suitcase and battered guitar. Rain pounded hard against the truck's windshield, and Jacob flicked the wipers into high gear. He felt a slight pang of worry about the farmland off in the distance. It was thirsty for water. Yes, but too much all at once could flood the fields. Still, there was no sense fretting about it now. The main concern was making sure he and his unexpected passenger got to the church in one piece. The road glistened with running water, and his tires slid a bit on the slick pavement. Annabelle sat quietly, pressing her lips together each time the truck skidded even a hair. Jacob attempted conversation to ease the tension. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked gently, careful not to pry too deep. "No," she answered, tightening her grip on the guitar case. I, I'm passing through. Just needed to get away." Her tone discouraged further questions, so Jacob nodded, satisfied with her minimal explanation. She had a soft, melodic voice, almost a singing lilt to it. If he were 20 years younger, he might have felt a little tug on his heart. But at his age, he was more concerned about the well-being of someone clearly adrift and alone. They soon pulled up to the front of St. Christopher's Church, an old red brick building that served as both a house of worship and a kind of informal relief center for the county's less fortunate. A flickering porch lamp revealed the worried face of Reverend Boyles, who stood under the eave. He gave a quick wave as Jacob parked. "Jacob, my good man," the Reverend called out, raising his voice over the rain. "You made it. Bless you, I was worried the storm might chase you home." Jacob hopped out into the deluge and tipped his old ball cap. "Can't let the storm stop me. Reverend, brought you those crates of eggs and a few preserves. Got a passenger, too." He gestured toward the truck, where Annabelle sat hesitantly. With a bit of coaxing, she stepped out, using Jacob's arm for balance on the wet pavement. The Reverend ushered them both inside, where the warm yellow lights of the church foyer felt like a sanctuary from the raging storm. Jacob introduced Annabelle as just someone who needed a ride, and Reverend Boyles nodded kindly, offering her a dry towel and an extra sweater. While Jacob and the Reverend moved the crates of supplies into the storage room, Annabelle stood off to the side, absorbing the quiet calm of the church interior. She seemed drawn to the rows of benches and the gentle hush that lingered in the air, as though searching for a sense of peace. Jacob noticed her fascination. "Feel free to sit if you'd like," he said softly. "Might do you good to rest a moment." But Annabelle shook her head, that guarded look returning to her eyes. "I'm fine, thank you." She held onto the guitar case, knuckles white against the handle. Reverend Boyles, ever perceptive, placed a hand gently on her arm. "Miss, if you need help," she lifted her gaze. "I appreciate it, but I'm all right." Her voice held a quiet strength that silenced any further inquiry. With a nod, the Reverend backed away, respecting her privacy. Once the supplies were stowed, Jacob turned back to her. "If you don't have another destination in mind, you could ride out the storm at my farm. It's not much, but it's dry." He paused, swallowing a flicker of worry. "Weather's only supposed to get worse tonight." For a moment, then, Annabelle hesitated, eyes flickering to the church door and the sheets of rain beyond. Something fear or sorrow passed over her features before she exhaled and nodded. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you." They bid the Reverend goodbye, stepping back into the storm. As they climbed into the pickup, Jacob felt the distinct sense that this encounter was about more than just providing shelter to a traveler. There was a heaviness around Annabelle that suggested scars, hidden deep. He might not know her story yet, but he recognized the look of someone running from something, and for reasons he couldn't yet explain, he felt compelled to help. The drive from St. Christopher's Church to Jacob's farm took another 20 minutes, and the storm did not relent. Sheets of rain hammered the tin roof of the old pickup. Lightning streaked through the sky like jagged spears, and thunder rattled the windows. Despite the weather, Jacob felt a calm sense of purpose. He'd offered help and shelter to plenty of people over the years, drifters, neighbors down on their luck, even a stray cat or two. The farm was more than a place to grow crops and raise livestock. It was, in his mind, a safe haven for those in need. Still, Annabelle Rhodes was different. Her silence wasn't merely polite or shy. There was an undercurrent of tension in her posture, something unspoken that pulsed beneath the surface. Jacob refrained from pressing. He knew that trust wasn't something you forced on people. It had to come naturally, and if he pried too soon, she might just slip away as quietly as she'd appeared. At last, he turned down a long gravel driveway lined with half-broken fences and a scattering of old oak trees. Through the rain, the faint glow of a porch light revealed a modest farmhouse, its paint peeling, its porch sagging, but its windows still warm. A large barn stood off to the left, surrounded by idle machinery and stacks of hay protected by tarps. Duke, Jacob's faithful chocolate-brown hound, darted out from beneath the awning of the barn, barking a greeting before hastily scampering back to cover. Jacob parked near the porch, hopped out, and grabbed an umbrella from behind the seat. Holding it aloft, he opened Annabelle's door. "Sorry if it's not the grandest welcome," he said, voice raised over the storm's roar, "but at least it's a roof." She smiled faintly, bracing herself as she stepped down onto the gravel. "A roof is all I need," she replied. Clutching her guitar case in one hand and her small suitcase in the other, she followed him up the steps. Inside, the house smelled of old wood and a lingering scent of coffee. The living room held a worn-out couch, an armchair that had seen better days, and walls lined with family photos dating back decades. A few pictures showed Jacob as a younger man, standing beside a radiant woman with kind eyes. Mary, no doubt. It was clear that the farmhouse hadn't changed much since her passing. There was a certain careful preservation to the place. Jacob led Annabelle to a small guest room near the back of the house. The bed was neatly made with an old patchwork quilt, and a humble chest of drawers stood against one wall. "This was my late wife's sewing room," he explained, turning on a dim lamp. "We never had kids, so she used it for her quilting. Figured it's as good a guest room as any." Annabelle set her things down, taking in her surroundings. "It's lovely," she said softly, and for the first time Jacob thought he saw genuine warmth in her eyes. "Thank you," he nodded. "Bathroom's just down the hall on the left. There's towels and soap if you want to wash up. I'll fix us some supper, nothing fancy. Maybe eggs and bacon." Her grateful nod was all he needed. He left her to settle in, heart oddly light despite the storm raging outside. Something told him this was more than a casual act of kindness. The old farmhouse, which had felt so empty for so long, might soon be filled with a presence that would stir up memories and possibly new beginnings he never dared imagine. After a quick change into dry clothes, Jacob busied himself in the kitchen, cracking eggs from his own coop into a bowl and whisking them with practiced efficiency. He tossed strips of bacon onto a sizzling cast-iron skillet, the aroma bringing a sense of homey comfort to the otherwise cold, wet night. Now and then he cast a glance toward the hallway, listening for any sound of Annabelle. He heard water running. She was presumably taking a short shower. Duke padded in, shook off some excess rainwater, and eyed Jacob expectantly. "No, boy, not tonight," Jacob chuckled, giving the dog a quick ear scratch. "You'll get your scraps once we're done." Duke let out a soft huff, then settled in a corner, content to wait. Soon enough, Annabelle emerged from the hallway, her damp hair brushed back and her cheeks flushed from the warm water. She wore a simple flannel shirt, likely Jacob's, borrowed from a spare closet and jeans that were clearly a bit too large. Yet, she carried herself with a quiet dignity, hugging her arms as though feeling out of place. Jacob motioned to the table. "Sit. It's almost ready." The meal was simple: scrambled eggs, bacon, and a couple slices of homemade bread toasted on the skillet. Annabelle took small bites at first, but soon her hunger overcame her reticence. She finished every morsel, and Jacob was pleased to see color returning to her cheeks. Over coffee, he gently tried to learn a bit about her, but she kept her answers short. Yes, she traveled a lot. No, she didn't have family nearby. Yes, she appreciated his generosity. No, she didn't have a set destination. When Jacob offered her more coffee, she gave a small nod. "If it's not too much trouble," she said, voice quiet. "Not at all." As he poured, he mustered the courage to be a bit more direct. "You a musician?" He gestured to the guitar case she had set against the wall. For a moment, her gaze flickered to the case and back again. "Yes," she admitted, I used to perform. Jacob waited, sensing she might reveal more. But she clammed up, sipping her coffee with a distant look in her eyes. Deciding not to push further, he simply said, "Well, it's nice to have music in the house again. My wife used to sing in the church choir. She had the voice of an angel. Folks said." He paused, letting a small, melancholy smile cross his face. "House has been awful quiet since she passed. I'm sorry for your loss," Annabelle murmured, her voice filled with genuine sympathy. Jacob looked at her, and for the first time he noticed faint shadows under her eyes, the same sort of weariness he'd seen in his own mirror after Mary died. This was more than just a traveler's fatigue. It looked like heartbreak etched into her expression. "Everyone's got something they're carrying," he said softly, not expecting a reply. To his surprise, Annabelle nodded. "Yes, I suppose we do." A flicker of pain crossed her features, but she masked it with a polite sip of coffee. The storm continued outside, pounding against the windows. Yet inside, the kitchen felt warm, both from the small feast and from the fragile, tentative connection forming between these two lonely souls. Whatever weight Annabelle bore, Jacob sensed that, at least for tonight, she was safe within these old farmhouse walls. Morning arrived with a calmer sky, though gray clouds still hovered. Jacob woke early, as usual, and found the house oddly comforting with the knowledge he wasn't entirely alone. Slipping on his boots, he stepped outside to feed the livestock. The land smelled of wet earth, a welcome sign that the crops might perk up, though, if the rain persisted. It could become a muddy mess. He felt that familiar tug of uncertainty every farmer knows nature gives and nature takes, all on its own schedule. While he tossed feed for the chickens, he heard the creak of the screen door. Turning, he saw Annabelle emerge, wearing the same borrowed clothes as last night, her hair braided loosely over one shoulder. She gave a hesitant wave. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," he echoed. "Figured you might sleep in a bit." She shrugged. "Couldn't. I'm used to early mornings, too." Then, spotting the chickens pecking around his feet, she cracked a small smile. Never actually fed chickens before. Jacob handed her a scoop of feed, guiding her through the motions. Annabelle scattered the grain a bit unevenly, but the birds didn't mind. They clucked happily and set to work pecking at the ground. She let out a tentative laugh at the way the chickens surged forward. "They seem hungry." "Always are," Jacob remarked, grateful she was willing to share in a routine chore. He gestured toward the barn. "I have a small dairy operation. 2. You're welcome to help, though it might be messy." She paused, then nodded with a trace of determination. "I'd like that." In the barn, Duke trotted alongside them, tail wagging. They passed the stalls where 2 Jersey cows stood, calmly chewing cud. Jacob showed Annabelle how to prepare the milking station, and she watched intently, absorbing every instruction. As she carefully set the pail and attempted her first awkward pulls, the cow flicked its tail, and Annabelle jumped back, startled. Jacob suppressed a chuckle, placing a hand gently on her shoulder to reassure her. "You'll get the hang of it," he said. "Just be patient." Annabelle tried again, more carefully. It took her several attempts, but soon she managed a rhythmic motion. Coaxing milk into the pail, she let out a small gasp of achievement, and Jacob felt a rush of pride for both her success and the spark of life he saw in her eyes. They finished the morning routine and returned to the house for a quick breakfast toast with jam, plus black coffee to chase away the chill. In the daylight, Annabelle examined the living room photos more closely, pausing at one that showed Jacob and Mary in front of a bright red tractor. "She looks lovely," Annabelle said quietly. "She was," Jacob replied, a softness in his voice that hinted at old wounds. Then he turned the conversation gently. "How about you? Anyone waiting for you somewhere?" Annabelle lowered her gaze. "No, not anymore." The haunted look flickered again, and Jacob nodded in understanding, deciding it was best not to pry. Yet that brief moment of openness told him more than any long explanation could. Whoever Annabelle was, she was someone running from a life that no longer fit, from a pain that lingered. He sensed the undercurrents of an untold story, one that had driven her to a stranger's farm in the midst of a storm. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he felt compelled to help her find whatever solace she needed, even if it meant letting her keep her secrets a little while longer. Later that same day, Jacob decided he needed a run into the nearby town of Greenfield. A broken fence post in the north pasture required new lumber, and he had a short list of groceries to pick up. To his surprise, Annabelle asked if she could tag along. She said she wanted to stretch her legs, though Jacob suspected she was curious about the local community, or perhaps wary of being left alone too long. The drive to Greenfield was pleasant. The storm clouds had dispersed, leaving wide swaths of blue above the rolling farmland. Jacob pointed out landmarks: an old one-room schoolhouse converted into a feed store, a narrow creek where he used to fish as a boy, and a line of elm trees that marked the boundary between his land and the next. Annabelle peered at everything with quiet attentiveness, occasionally smiling at Duke, who rode in the truck bed, his ears flapping in the wind. Greenfield was a modest place, a single main street with brick storefronts, a diner named Marla's Kitchen, and a general store run by Mr. Haskins. Jacob parked in front of the store, stepping out with a wave to the folks who loitered on the sidewalk. People greeted him by name. He was a fixture in these parts. After all, though not exactly known for being talkative. Annabelle held back a little, tugging a baseball cap low over her eyes. Jacob offered her an encouraging nod. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "They're good people. Inside." Mr. Haskins greeted Jacob with a hearty grin. "Emery thought you'd show up after that downpour. Lucky your place didn't flood out." Then he noticed Annabelle. And who might this be? She opened her mouth to reply, but Jacob gently spoke first. "A friend helping out at the farm for a bit," he said. "Name's Annabelle." Haskins extended a hand, and Annabelle shook it politely, offering a small, polite smile. Jacob could see her tension, her shoulders a bit stiff. She seemed afraid someone might recognize her, though he couldn't fathom why. While Mr. Haskins tallied up the lumber costs, Jacob noticed a stack of magazines near the counter. Celebrity gossip rags, the kind he never bothered with. The top cover featured the headline, "Where is she now? The mysterious disappearance of country star Annabelle Rhodes." Beneath the bold letters was a photograph of a glamorous young woman in a sequined dress, microphone in hand, her eyes bright with stage lights. Jacob blinked, his gaze flickering between the magazine and Annabelle. The woman on the cover looked so polished, so confident, yet there was an undeniable resemblance, the same shape of the bow, the same soulful eyes. He felt his stomach twist. Could it really be her? He quickly looked back at Annabelle, who avoided his eyes. She'd seen the magazine too. Her face had gone pale, sensing her discomfort. Jacob smoothly placed a hand over the pile of magazines, shifting them aside. "Anything else we need for the farm?" he asked, voice calm. She swallowed, then shook her head. "No, I think that's it." Mr. Haskins, oblivious, handed over the bill and chatted on about the coming county fair. As they walked out, Jacob carried the lumber on his shoulder, while Annabelle clung to a small bag of groceries. Neither spoke a word about the magazine or the name on it, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. And Jacob suspected he'd just uncovered a piece of Annabelle's secret that changed everything. Back in the truck, the silence was thick. Annabelle stared at her hands, her grip on the grocery bag uncomfortably tight. Jacob set the lumber in the bed, glanced at Duke, then climbed behind the wheel. He started the engine but didn't pull away immediately. Instead, he let the rumble of the truck fill the space, giving Annabelle a chance to speak if she wanted. When she said nothing, he inhaled slowly and said, "Listen, I'm not one to pry, but if you've got something you need to tell me, now might be a good time." Her eyes flicked to his, a mixture of fear and resignation in them. She cleared her throat, glancing out the window at the small town street scene, neighbors greeting neighbors, teenage kids riding bikes, an old couple sharing an umbrella under the midday sun. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. "I never meant to lie to you, Jacob. I didn't know if I could trust anyone." Jacob nodded, not looking away. "So, you are Annabelle Rhodes." The country singer. She breathed out, her entire body deflating. Yes, she said quietly. I am. He leaned back against the seat, processing. I knew your name sounded familiar, but, well, I don't follow the music scene much. I've seen your face on commercials. I think, or maybe in the paper. He paused, searching her face. The magazines say you disappeared. She closed her eyes. I did. I had to. The words hung in the air, heavy with untold stories. He didn't press. Instead, he waited. At length, she opened her eyes, tears threatening to spill. Clayton Pierce was my manager and boyfriend. In a way, and he controlled everything: my schedule, my finances, the music I recorded. At first, I thought he cared about me, about my career, but he didn't. He only cared about what I could earn him. Jacob's jaw set. He'd known men like that, though not in the music business, men who treated women like property. It stirred a protective anger in him, but he kept silent so she could continue. Annabelle fiddled with the ends of her braid. I found out he was cheating me out of royalties, forging contracts in my name. When I tried to leave, she took a shaky breath, and Jacob had no trouble filling in the blanks. The bruise on her arm he'd noticed earlier, the wary look in her eyes. That's why you ran, he said gently. She nodded. Yes, I left my phone behind, cut off my credit cards. I didn't want him to track me. I drove until my rental car broke down near a bus station a couple counties over. Then I hitchhiked and ended up in that storm. Jacob felt the weight of her confession. This wasn't just a simple matter of a celebrity on the run from paparazzi. Annabelle was escaping something truly dangerous, and she'd chosen his farm by sheer chance to hide. Sighing, he reached over and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. You're safe for now, he said. He's not going to find you here. She closed her eyes again, nodding. Thank you, I don't want to bring trouble to your doorstep. Jacob shook his head. Trouble or not, you needed help. I don't regret that. He hesitated a moment, then added, but you need to think about what comes next. Hiding forever might not be the answer. Her eyes opened, a flicker of determination beneath the tears. I know, she murmured. I need time, Jacob. Time to figure out what to do. He put the truck in gear and pulled away from Greenfield. Then take all the time you need. We'll sort this out together. Over the next few days, a quiet routine settled in at the Emery farm. Annabelle continued helping with chores, feeding animals, milking cows, and occasionally assisting Jacob in the fields when the weather allowed. She took to the work with a surprising tenacity, as if the simple, grounded tasks provided an antidote to the anxiety that clung to her. More than once, Jacob found himself admiring her resolve. She wasn't just passing the time, she was immersing herself in a world drastically different from the glitzy stages she must have once known. In the evenings, after supper, they would sit in the living room. Jacob often thumbed through an old farm ledger or read the local paper while Annabelle cradled her guitar, plucking strings softly. At first, she played only instrumentals slow, haunting melodies that seemed to reflect the hush of the countryside at dusk. But soon, she began to sing quietly. Jacob was mesmerized by her voice, warm yet powerful, carrying an undercurrent of longing. There was no fancy reverb, no microphone, just the raw purity of a gifted artist rediscovering her music in a farmhouse living room. One evening, he dared to ask her more about her songs. She hesitated at first, but then explained that she'd been writing new material songs that weren't commissioned by a label. Songs that captured her heartbreak, her need for freedom, and her awakening to a simpler life. Jacob listened intently, offering only the occasional nod. For a man of few words, he found himself utterly drawn to her artistry. During the day, he noticed another change. Annabelle began to venture outdoors more confidently, no longer ducking her head every time a truck rumbled down the country lane. She even accompanied Jacob on a trip back to St. Christopher's Church, where she helped Reverend Boyles organize a small clothing drive. Afterward, she spent time chatting with some of the older parishioners, smiling at their stories of harvest festivals and local legends. There was, however, A lingering sense of unease, like a distant thunder that wouldn't entirely fade. Sometimes a sound from outside would make Annabelle flinch, or she'd grow quiet when a conversation veered too close to her past. At night, Jacob would check the locks on the doors twice, mindful of the shadow that loomed beyond their rural sanctuary. He also noticed something else. Folks in town had started asking questions. Mr. Haskins had mentions to a few curious neighbors that Jacob Emery had taken in a female helper. It was harmless gossip, the sort that circulated in a small community, but Jacob worried it might draw the wrong kind of attention if anyone got too nosy, or if a stranger came snooping with more pointed questions. One afternoon, while repairing the fence line, Jacob spotted a dark SUV rolling slowly down the public road that bordered his property. The windows were tinted, and it lingered a bit too long before driving off. He felt a knot tighten in his gut. Could it be someone connected to Clayton Pierce? Or was he letting his imagination run wild when he returned to the house? Annabelle was tuning her guitar on the porch. He almost told her about the SUV, but then decided against it. She deserved at least a little peace. Instead, he simply said, "We might want to be careful about who we talk to in town. Keep things low-key." She nodded, understanding perfectly, her fingers pausing mid-note. They were living in a fragile calm, each day tinged with the possibility that her past might come roaring back. Yet in that suspended moment, the farm offered sanctuary, a place where their shared burdens felt a little lighter, and where they could both rediscover parts of themselves they thought were lost. One brisk morning, Annabelle woke earlier than usual, drawn to the window by the faint glow of dawn. The field stretched out in a misty haze, dew sparkling like tiny diamonds on the grass. She quietly dressed in the work clothes Jacob had loaned her, sturdy jeans and a flannel shirt, then made her way outside. She found Jacob near the barn, carrying a bucket of feed for the chickens. He glanced up, mildly surprised. "You beat me to the chores," he teased, a half smile on his weathered face. She took the bucket from him gently. "I want to help, and uh, I wanted to talk to you about something," she said. He nodded for her to continue, and she lowered her voice, mindful of the still sleeping countryside around them. "I've been thinking about my next step," she began. "I can't stay hidden forever. Sooner or later, I have to face what Clayton did. Legally, morally, all of it." Jacob set down the bucket for a moment and leaned against the barn door. "You mean hiring a lawyer, pressing charges, that sort of thing?" Annabelle nodded. "Yes, I have proof documents, transactions he forged. There's enough to at least threaten a lawsuit, maybe even criminal charges. But to do that, I have to come forward. I have to step into the spotlight again." He studied her face, seeing the conflict there. "That means risking Clayton finding you," he said, "and the media, too. Once you go public, it'll be a feeding frenzy." She took a shaky breath. "I know, but if I don't do it, I'll always be running, and I refuse to let him control my life any longer." There was steel in her voice, the same determination she'd shown when learning to milk a cow. Only now it was aimed at something far more daunting. Jacob admired her courage. He also felt a stab of worry in his chest, knowing that once she left, the fragile piece of his farm would vanish. But he understood her reasoning. "I support you," he said simply, meaning every word. "Whatever you decide to do, you can count on me to help." She blinked back tears of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, covering his hand with hers. For a moment, they stood there in the early light, sharing a silent understanding that they were at a crossroads. The day pressed on, full of small farm tasks, but the conversation lingered in the back of Jacob's mind. By late afternoon, Annabelle had made several phone calls on a burner phone she'd picked up at a gas station weeks prior, calls to an old friend in Nashville, calls to a lawyer who had once helped her negotiate a recording contract. She spoke quietly, pacing in the farm's living room, leaving Jacob to busy himself in the barn so he wouldn't overhear more than necessary. When she emerged, she looked both drained and resolute. "They want me to come to Nashville as soon as I can," she said. "The lawyers need me to sign documents, give statements, There's a chance the label might settle out of court, but we can't know until I'm there in person. Jacob felt that pang of selfish longing, wishing she could stay a bit longer, wishing they had more time to explore the bond that had grown between them. But he forced a small smile. Then that's what you need to do, Dorothy said. Duke, and I'll hold down the fort here. This farm isn't going anywhere. Annabelle's eyes glistened, and she nodded. I know, she whispered, her voice catching. That's what I love about it. They spent the next 2 days making arrangements. Annabelle borrowed Jacob's truck to run back into Greenfield and pick up a few necessities and outfit more suitable for a legal meeting than mud-stained jeans, a proper suitcase to replace the battered backpack she'd been using, to keep her identity under wraps. She wore sunglasses and a broad hat, feeling a bit absurd but unwilling to risk being recognized. Jacob, meanwhile, made sure the farm would be in decent shape if he had to leave for a while. He debated whether to accompany Annabelle to Nashville. On one hand, he felt it might be too big a risk. Two strangers driving across multiple states might draw attention if Clayton or his associates were on the lookout. On the other hand, he couldn't stand the idea of sending Annabelle off alone, not after everything they'd shared. The decision was made one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset cast orange and pink hues across the horizon. Annabelle strummed her guitar softly, humming a tune Jacob didn't recognize. When she finished, he spoke up. If you need me there, I'll come, he said. I'm not much good in a city, but I can at least offer moral support. She glanced over, a tender expression on her face. I do want you there, she admitted, but I also don't want to upend your life. This farm I can manage a week or two, he interrupted gently. Besides, my neighbor, Gil Reeves, owes me a favor. He can watch the livestock. A shy smile touched her lips. Then let's do it. We'll drive together. Keep each other safe. That night, Jacob found himself lying awake in bed, the old mattress creaking beneath him. His thoughts were a tangled mess of hope, fear, and something else he hadn't felt in a long time, an excitement. Was it possible he was actually looking forward to a trip away from his beloved land? Or was it that he simply couldn't bear to let Annabelle walk into that legal battleground alone? His memories drifted back to Mary, and a pang of guilt tugged at him. He'd loved his wife dearly, still did, in a way, but Mary had been gone nearly a decade, and Annabelle was very much here, breathing life into corners of his heart he thought were forever dormant. He wondered if Mary would approve of him feeling this spark again. Maybe she would. Mary had always been the generous type, telling him to live life fully. In the morning, he and Annabelle packed the truck with supplies, water, snacks, a spare gas can. She folded her guitar gently into the extended cab, unable to leave it behind. Duke whined as if sensing something monumental was happening. Jacob knelt to scratch behind the dog's ears. You stay and look after Gil. You hear Duke licked his hand, ears drooping. Gil Reeves showed up shortly after dawn, waving from his battered sedan. Don't worry, I'll keep your critters fed, he promised, giving Jacob a hearty handshake. He offered Annabelle a polite tip of the hat. She nodded, thanked him quietly, and climbed into the passenger seat of the truck. Jacob slid behind the wheel, feeling the strange thrill of a journey beginning. As they pulled away, the farm's mailbox, white paint peeling, loomed in the side mirror. He whispered a silent goodbye to the fields and the house, not knowing how long they would be on or what might await them in Nashville. The road stretched out before them, winding through farmland and small towns, each hour bringing Annabelle and Jacob closer to Nashville and closer to the confrontation she'd worked so hard to avoid. Initially, the mood in the truck was tense. Annabelle stared at the fields blurring by, occasionally playing with the edge of her guitar case. Jacob kept his eyes on the road, dividing his attention between traffic and the swirl of thoughts in his head. After the first 100 miles, they stopped at a roadside diner, the kind with faded vinyl booths and a jukebox that probably hadn't been updated in decades. Over eggs and hash browns, Jacob finally mustered the courage to break the silence. You're sure about this? He asked gently, stirring his coffee. Going back. I mean, facing Clayton. Annabelle met his gaze, her fingers tightening around the mug. I'm sure, she said, though her voice trembled with nerves. He can't keep doing this to me or to anyone else. He's a bully, and I've had enough. Jacob nodded, respect filling him. They talked more about logistics. The lawyer's office was near Music Row, and they had an appointment scheduled for the next morning. Annabelle also had to meet a representative from her record label, someone who apparently wasn't in Clayton's pocket. The plan was to serve official wipers, forcing him to appear in court if negotiations failed. They got back on the road, pressing on through the day. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in a crimson glow, they began seeing billboards for Nashville attractions, country music museums, the Grand Ole Opry, countless honky-tonks. By dusk, the city lights appeared on the horizon, a stark contrast to the quiet farm life they had left behind. Annabelle tensed, visibly steeling herself for what lay ahead. Jacob, sensing her anxiety, reached over and gently squeezed her hand. "We'll face this together," he said. She managed a small smile, her eyes shadowed with worry. They checked into a modest motel on the outskirts of the city, hoping to avoid attention. Annabelle insisted on paying for the rooms. It seemed important to her not to impose further on Jacob's kindness. Exhausted from the drive, they said little as they carried their bags inside. Annabelle lingered by the door to Jacob's room before speaking. "I just want to say thank you," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "You've done so much for me. A stranger." Jacob gave a modest shrug. "You're not a stranger." "Annabelle, not anymore." She nodded, biting her lip to hold back tears. "Good night, Jacob," she whispered, then turned toward her own room, guitar in hand. He watched her go, feeling that same protective surge he'd felt when she first stepped into his truck. Tomorrow, she would walk into a conference room full of high-powered attorneys and label executives, each with their own agenda. And possibly, if the rumors were correct, Clayton Pierce himself might show up, ready to intimidate her back into submission. Jacob closed his door, locked it, and sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. He glanced at the phone on the nightstand. For a moment, he considered calling Gil to check on the farm, but decided against it. There was nothing he could do from here. Anyway, instead, he prayed silently, asking for the strength to help Annabelle through whatever awaited them. Then, weary from the long drive, he switched off the light and tried to sleep, visions of farmland and starlit porches dancing in his head. Morning arrived, and with it, a sense of tense anticipation. Annabelle dressed in a simple navy blue pantsuit, an outfit entirely unlike the rhinestone-studded ensembles that had once been her stage uniform. She wanted to appear poised but not flashy, confident but not arrogant. Jacob waited outside her door, wearing his one decent shirt and slacks. He felt uncomfortable, tugging at the collar, but he also recognized the necessity. They were entering a world of lawyers and public relations experts, and appearances mattered. The law offices sat in a towering glass building that overlooked a busy street filled with honking cars and rushing pedestrians. Annabelle's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Carla Nguyen, met them in the lobby. She shook both their hands, then led them to a conference room that had a panoramic window offering a view of the city skyline. Inside, a second woman in a tailored suit introduced herself as Sharon Fields, a representative from Annabelle's record label, Sunshine Records. Jacob felt out of place as they got down to business. Carla presented documents, listing out the financial irregularities and manipulative clauses in Annabelle's contracts. Sharon explained that the label was willing to negotiate if Annabelle would return to recording under fairer terms. But the real threat was Clayton Pierce, who not only had a personal hold on Annabelle, but also some loyal allies within the music industry. Annabelle's voice was steady as she described the emotional abuse and the intimidation she'd endured under Clayton's so-called management. Carla nodded, taking notes, then looked at Sharon. "If Sunshine Records truly wants to separate itself from this scandal, we need them to support a restraining order," she said, "and we need them to release Annabelle from those exploitative clauses." Sharon nodded thoughtfully. "We've drafted new paperwork that would grant Annabelle sole control of her future recordings. The board knows a public lawsuit would damage the label's reputation if word got out that one of our managers was abusing artists." Jacob caught Annabelle's gaze, silently asking if she was okay. She gave him a tight smile, eyes brimming with both relief and anxiety. It was happening, which was taking back her power. Then the door swung open, and the atmosphere shifted. Clayton Pierce strode in, flanked by a tall man in a suit. Clayton looked polished, exuding a smug confidence that made Jacob's blood boil on sight. He met Annabelle's eyes with a sneer. "So, this is where you've been hiding," he drawled. Carla immediately rose. "Mr. Pierce, you weren't invited to this meeting." Clayton dismissed her with a wave, focusing on Annabelle. "You're making a big mistake, sweetheart," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "You think these lawyers are going to protect you from me?" From the press, Jacob tensed, forcing himself not to speak out of turn. He watched as Annabelle squared her shoulders, refusing to wilt under Clayton's gaze. "I'm done letting you control me," she said, her voice firm. Clayton's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this." Before he could continue, Carla interjected. "Mr. Pierce, my client has evidence of your financial misconduct and abuse. We're prepared to file criminal charges. If you think you can bully her, you're in for a surprise." The tension in the room crackled. Annabelle remained stoic, though Jacob could see her hands trembling ever so slightly. Clayton opened his mouth to retort, but his lawyer placed a hand on his arm, urging caution. After a moment of tense silence, Clayton took a seat, forcing a smirk that spoke volumes that he was cornered, but not defeated. The negotiations began, with Carla outlining terms and Sharon supporting Annabelle's right to walk away from her current contracts. Clayton's lawyer listened, occasionally conferring in hushed tones. Meanwhile, Jacob stood behind Annabelle's chair, a silent pillar of solidarity, ready to intervene if Clayton tried any more intimidation tactics. For nearly 2 hours, the conference room buzzed with arguments, counteroffers, and legal jargon that made Jacob's head spin. Annabelle's evidence was laid out in stark detail: forged signatures, diverted royalties, and an unsettling pattern of psychological manipulation. Carla pressed relentlessly, highlighting the threat of a criminal lawsuit if Clayton refused to agree to the proposed settlement. Clayton fumed, occasionally pacing the room, but his lawyer reined him in each time he tried to lash out. Sunshine Records, represented by Sharon, made it clear they wanted no part of the scandal. They wished to salvage Annabelle's career in a way that distanced them from Clayton's behavior. By the time lunch rolled around, Clayton's side seemed boxed in, forced to sign a preliminary agreement that ended his professional and personal control over Annabelle. When the final page was slid across the table for signatures, the tension felt almost unbearable. Annabelle picked up the pen, pausing to glance at Jacob. Their eyes met, and he gave a slight nod of encouragement. With a deep breath, she signed her name, effectively severing the chains that had bound her life to Clayton's. Clayton snatched the pen and scrawled his own signature, practically carving his name into the paper. He stood abruptly, glowering at Annabelle. "You think you've won," he spat, "but the industry won't forget this. You'll never work a main stage again without me pulling the strings." Annabelle's voice cut through the air, quiet yet unwavering. "Then I'll build a new stage," she said. "I don't need your strings." Clayton stared a moment longer, then stormed out, leaving his lawyer to gather the documents in tight-lipped silence. Sharon exhaled, clearly relieved that the confrontation had ended without a full-blown shouting match. Carla began checking each page, ensuring every signature was in place. Jacob stepped beside Annabelle, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" he asked softly. She let out a shaky laugh, tears glistening in her eyes. "I think so," she whispered. "It feels surreal. I've been dreading this moment for so long." Carla cleared her throat. "We'll file for a protective order immediately," she said. "Clayton might try more intimidation, but legally he's on thin ice now." Nodding, Annabelle took a long sip of water, her hands still trembling. "Thank you, Carla. You have no idea how much this means." Sharon then spoke up, her tone measured but surprisingly compassionate. "Annabelle, I know trust is hard right now, but if you're willing to record new material under fair terms, Sunshine Records still believes in your talent. We'd love to have you, but it's your choice." Annabelle exchanged a glance with Jacob. The relief in her eyes was tinged with uncertainty. "I need some time," she said. "I'm not sure I want the same career I had before." Sharon nodded understandingly. Take all the time you need. Our door is open and I promise no more backroom deals. Carla gathered up the final stack of papers. That's that. Then, for now, you are free from Clayton's legal grip. Just remember to stay vigilant. He's not the type to let go easily. Annabelle swallowed, her fingers curling around the handle of her guitar case as if seeking comfort. Jacob placed a reassuring arm around her back, guiding her toward the door. Together, they stepped into the hallway, leaving behind the swirl of legal documents and heated tempers. Outside, the sun cast bright beams across Nashville's bustling streets, a symbolic reminder that the darkest storms do eventually pass. In the days that followed, Annabelle dealt with the emotional aftermath of the legal showdown. She felt a mixture of triumph and lingering fear. Clayton's threat still echoed in her mind. Yet each morning she awoke to find Jacob by her side, a steady presence in this chaotic re-entry into the world she had fled. They stayed in Nashville longer than planned, meeting with Carla to finalize protective orders and ensuring that local authorities were aware of the situation. Annabelle also fielded phone calls from old friends who'd heard rumors of her return. Some calls were supportive, others prying, but she navigated them all with a newfound strength. Jacob marveled at how composed she remained, how the vulnerability he'd seen at the farm transformed into quiet resolve under these city lights. Despite the progress, both of them felt homesick for Iowa. Jacob especially missed the wide skies and the gentle rhythm of farm life. When Carla confirmed that the bulk of the legal paperwork was complete, he broached the idea of returning home. "You've done what you needed to do here," he said as they walked through a downtown park filled with blooming dogwoods. "We can head back anytime you want." Annabelle paused, looking at him with a hesitant smile. "Do you mind if we stay just a bit longer? There's a place I want to go, something I need to do." He raised an eyebrow. "Sure, as long as it doesn't involve bumping into Clayton again." She shook her head. "No, it's the Bluebird Cafe." The name rang a distant bell in Jacob's mind. He recalled reading about it somewhere, a famous spot for songwriters and up-and-coming country singers. "You want to perform?" he asked. Gently. Annabelle looked almost shy. "Sort of. I used to do open mic nights there before everything got so big. It's where I fell in love with songwriting. I thought, maybe I could sing one of my new songs, just to see how it feels." Jacob's heart lifted at the idea. "I think that's a wonderful plan," he said. "I'll be your biggest fan in the audience." She reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. The simple gesture spoke volumes about the bond that had formed between them, born of trust, hardship, and quiet, consistent support. That night, they arrived at the small, unassuming venue. The stage was just a corner of the room, lit by a few warm spotlights. People took turns performing original pieces, some trembling with nerves, others oozing confidence. Annabelle waited in the back, guitar case at her feet, scanning the crowd. No paparazzi, no ominous figures lurking. It felt almost too normal. Finally, her name was called, just Annabelle Shilsham, no surname. She stepped onto the stage, adjusting the microphone. For a moment, she closed her eyes, centering herself. Then she spoke softly into the mic, introducing a song she'd written at a quiet farm in Iowa, a place that had given her refuge. Her gaze flicked briefly to Jacob, sitting near the front, his hands clasped in silent encouragement. Her voice rose, low at first, but gathering strength with each chord. The lyrics told of storms literal and metaphorical, and finding shelter in an unexpected safe harbor. It was raw, vulnerable, and when she reached the chorus, a hush fell over the audience. Even the bartenders paused to listen. Jacob felt tears sting his eyes, overwhelmed by the sheer honesty in her performance. As Annabelle finished, the room burst into applause. She stood there, breathless, a slight quiver in her hand, still gripping the guitar pick. Jacob rose to his feet, clapping until his palms burned. For Annabelle Bishop, this was more than just a song. It was a reclamation of her voice, her dignity, her life. They left Nashville the next morning, the truck loaded with a new sense of purpose and a cautious hope for the future. Carla assured Annabelle that if Clayton violated the protective order, he'd be in serious legal trouble. The label had sent a revised contract, which Annabelle tucked into her suitcase, no hurry to sign, but grateful for the chance to record on her own terms one day. Jacob drove most of the way, while Annabelle occasionally strummed her guitar in the passenger seat. Their conversations drifted between planning the immediate tasks that awaited them back at the farm and imagining possibilities beyond it. She spoke of maybe buying a small place in Nashville, just a little cabin, she joked, where she could come and go to record new music. He mentioned ways to revitalize the farm, perhaps experimenting with a direct-to-consumer produce model. They were big ideas, but after everything they'd overcome, neither found them impossible. As they crossed into Iowa, a sense of relief washed over them both. The farmland, with its endless rows of crops and softly rolling hills, felt like a refuge all over again. When they finally turned onto that familiar gravel drive, Duke bounded out from the barn, barking frantically. Gil Reeves waved from the porch, calling out, "Welcome back." Jacob parked by the house. Shutting off the engine, the hum of cicadas filled the evening air. Annabelle stepped out, inhaling deeply as if savoring the scent of the fields. She walked over to Gil, thanking him profusely for taking care of the animals. Gil nodded, winking conspiratorially at Jacob. "Place ran smooth, but it's good to have you both back," he said. "I think we all missed her singing." Jacob found the barn in good order, the fences reasonably mended, and the livestock well tended. But the best part was seeing that the farmhouse no longer felt empty. Annabelle's presence added a quiet warmth. She unpacked her things, setting the new legal documents in a safe drawer, placing her guitar on a stand in the living room as if it belonged there. They spent that night on the porch, the sky ablaze with stars. Annabelle played the song she'd performed at the Bluebird, her voice drifting across the fields. Jacob sat beside her, letting the music wash over him. He realized that, despite the differences in their worlds, they had found something precious solace in each other's company and a shared belief in second chances. Later, as they stood at the porch railing, looking out at the moonlit farm, Annabelle rested her head on Jacob's shoulder. "What happens next?" she asked softly, her breath warm against his flannel shirt. He slid an arm around her waist. "We plant," he said simply. "We tend, we wait for new growth, and we keep going, together." She smiled at the poetic simplicity of his answer. After all the storms, literal and figurative, the soil of their lives was ready for new seeds. Maybe it was love, maybe companionship, or maybe just the steady reassurance that neither was alone anymore. Behind them, the farmhouse's light glowed in the darkness. Far off in the fields, a soft breeze rustled the crops, a lullaby of the land. And though Clayton Pierce might still lurk somewhere, plotting his next move, he no longer had the power to dictate Annabelle's story. She was free to write a new chapter. And Jacob Emery was right there, pen in hand, helping her shape every line. In that quiet moment, they both understood the hardest battles weren't over, but they had already won something far greater than any court settlement or recording contract. They'd found home in each other, a place of safety and hope that no storm, however fierce, could wash away. In the end, it was more than a fight for freedom. It was about reclaiming dignity, truth, and rediscovering hope in the most unexpected place, the humble heartland of America. An aging farmer who'd lost his faith found purpose again, and a country music legend learned that true strength means standing up to fear and fighting back against the powerful. From the stormy night that brought them together to the fierce legal battle that tested their resolve, their journey proves it's never too late to rewrite your story. This powerful tale reminds us all that courage can be found where we least expect it, and that sometimes ordinary people can create extraordinary change. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What did you think of their battle for justice and redemption? Do you have your own story of overcoming adversity? Please leave a comment below and join the discussion. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales that speak to the heart and soul.